أعوذ بالله العلي العظيم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. Let's let other people in first. Staying in. Not many people. Riaz. Okay, dokie. Here we are in, I guess, session number. What is it? We're in session number 4 of our Ibn Arabi. One week behind. Um, So I hope you guys have taken good notes. We did the divine names and attributes last week, which touched on some of the points that are about to now come up in this next chapter, the third chapter, on the permanent archetypes, or the ayana thabita, the immutable archetypal entities, which is such a thorny, crucial, and sensitive topic in the entire metaphysics of Ibn Arabi. So I will read the first paragraph because I think it kind of sets the tone um, for everything else that we will be discussing. And he lays out his terms and what have you. He says that know that the divine names possess intelligible forms, suwar ma'gula, in the divine knowledge, since he knows his essence, names, and attributes through himself. Those forms of knowledge, given that are identical with the essence, are theophanies of special or specific individuation, ta'ayyun, and the specific relation called the permanent archetypes, or the immutable archetypal entities that I usually translated by al-ayyan thabita, whether they are universal or particular in the terminology of God's folk. The rationalists call it universals, these universals, quiddities, mahiyat, and realities, agha'iq, and its particulars, ipseities, huwiyat. So this first paragraph is extremely helpful for setting the tone about what the school of Ibn Arabi is even talking about in terms of the ayana thabita. And then the rest of the chapter goes on to both delineate what these are and also to distinguish it from the understanding that some of the other schools, including, by inference, the Illuminationists understand by this concept. Although, in my humble opinion, this distinction between what the Ayan Thabita are and the way that Suhrawardi deals with them in the Hikmat al-Ishraq is quite thin. It's only the later tradition when you find the two camps between those who support the primacy of being versus those who support the primacy of quiddity, that this distinction becomes a very sharp and thorny debate. But in Suhrawardi itself, as we will discover when we start to read the Hikmat al-Ishraq, the matters are not as cut as dry as the later tradition has made them out to be. So I hope you guys have taken good extensive notes so we can, discuss these points critically. So the floor is open. Whoever wants to start, jump in.
Uh, Excuse me. I'd like to start again, if I may.
Yeah.
The last session, I had expressed my confusion, which has been since then clarified. And I asked the question, what's the difference between an attribute and a name? And of course, I kind of forgot that it's actually explained in the first paragraph of the
Yes.
preceding chapter.
Yeah.
So just for laughs, I just wanted to reread. So I'm going back to chapter 2 for just a moment.
No problem.
And okay, I just read this first paragraph. Where is it here? Jesus, where is it?
Know that you want me to read it? I can read it if you want. Know that God,
Okay.
the glorified and exalted, according to the verse, every day he's upon some new being. I don't know why he translates it like this. Every day it is upon some new state, possesses states, shu'unat, and theophanies, tajalliyat, in the divine degrees and according to those states and degrees. He has attributes and names. The attributes are either affirmative or privative.
Right, right, exactly. So right there, just we're getting technical here, but of course, this is the whole point of this particular exercise. And really, we can say that the attributes are states and the names are degrees. So the question isn't so much what are attributes and names, it's what are states and degrees. But I think that kind of is made clear in this chapter 3.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to point that out for the record that in
sure.
my mind, I'm saying attributes are states
Mhm.
and names are degrees.
But here's the thing, and this is debated between between these different schools and even between within a different school. What some people take as something that is affirmative or privative, and then make it an attribute to others can also function as the name. One example that even Ibn Arabi himself vacillates on between different works is the name Al-Hayy, the living. One place he calls it a name, then elsewhere he calls it the supreme attribute, and then on it goes. In some of the glosses on the names that we have in the Shiite tradition, Al-Hayy is a name. It's an is, right? So within even this terrain of something being either affirmative or privative and something descriptive of divine degrees and states, there's a fluidity between the understanding of what each of them are. So it's not as cut and dry as Qaysari would have us believe
Right, right,
on the surface of what he's writing. It's a lot more complicated, and there's a lot of debate about that within the tradition.
right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yes. So yeah, I totally agree. It's definitely not cut and dry, definitely not black and white. And as we see very clearly in this third chapter, there's always seems to be at least two aspects of everything.
yeah,
And so that being, so it's good that you mentioned that. But I did want to return to that question because it was me that expressed my confusion in that regard last time. So that's a little bit more of a technical answer to that question.
great.
But anyway, I before I go on and talk about this chapter, that's what I wanted to say first off, and I'll stop and let someone else speak for now.
Okay, come back to you anytime.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would want to open up this whole discussion uh, on quiddities and archetypes, um, the, because this brings us back to Mullah Sadra, and I started to think about the differences that I see between Sadra and Ibn Arabi. Like I feel like we're now back in the world of Ibn Arabi, where at least the way that I read these two figures here, it's the quiddities have so much more of a role to play.
Yeah,
It seems in ontology, where in Sadra, even I think the way that Qaysari describes the non-being of the quiddities seems to be different from the way that Sadra talks about the non-being. I might be misunderstanding Sadra, but here the non-being is just the non-being in its
essentially
individuation.
in its essential materiality. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but that the flip side of that is that it's actually uh, it's very prominent in being. It's so because it's not individuated, it has so much being because it's the same as the essence. But in my understanding, when we went through the wisdom of the throne, was that Sadra was saying that quiddities are non-being in the sense of like just nothingness. Like they're just ideas that are produced in the mind when we observe things. And also related to that, there's the distinction that Qaysari makes really clear between the being of the mahiyat in God's knowledge and the being in human knowledge, which I also don't see in Sadra, because it almost seems like he doesn't want to even say that they exist in divine knowledge.
He does get into this, to his credit. He does get into this in some analytical detail in the Asfar, in the relevant sections where he's talking about all of this stuff. What you put your finger on is a valid, I think, criticism of Mullah Sadra. I've sort of had the same question about Mullah Sadra's treatment of the Mahiyat versus the Ayan al-Thabita in Ibn Arabi. He sometimes appears to me to want to have his cake and eat it too, because on the one hand, he does assert exactly what you say, whether in the Wisdom of the Throne or elsewhere. But then elsewhere, he kind of posits a haqiqa, a reality to these intelligibles on a level that is almost, reiterating the same point by the school of Ibn Arabi. And then he also wants to have the kind of a Suhrawardian gloss on what these archetypes, these arbab and no, or higher, even the higher realities and on the levels above it are. So yes, this is a valid observation about Mullah Sadra's treatment of this vis-a-vis Ibn Arabi. I agree with you, 100%. And he sort of resolves it in the Asfar al-Arba'a, but I think the way that he unpacks it leaves some room for doubt. And this has been commented on by others in the past, not so much Sabzavari, but I think in a few of the comments that the late Sayyid Jalaluddin Ashtiani makes in several of his work, I can't identify which one right now, but I've read it. He does kind of address this in his study. It's in Persian. I'll have to search for it to find where I've put this thing. And he does actually raise the very point that you just did. But the way that he resolves it, that he says that this is just a barrier in a sense in language between Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra, that they're basically articulating the same thing, except that the language that Mullah Sadra is using can become a little bit misleading if you don't know the larger context of what he's dealing with in this greater issue. But he says that there is perfect congruence between what Mullah Sadra understands by Mahiyat and what Ibn Arabi understands by Ayan al-Thabita. I don't think it's a stretch what he's saying, but I do agree that the problem with Mullah Sadra can become a problem of demonstration and the language that he's using to demonstrate it versus what Qaysari is saying, which is very clear.
Yeah, because when we read through the Wisdom of the Throne, and I had a lot of questions about that, and the sense that I came away with was that the mahiyat are almost just like nothing. Like they have like no effectivity, whereas here
they do. They have a lot of effectivity. It's interesting in the way that Qaysari lays this out throughout this chapter, because it is. Now we know that Qaysari knew Suhrawardi. He cites Suhrawardi in many places, even within this commentary, in the larger part of it. The way that he deals with the Ayan al-Thabita is very similar to the way that Suhrawardi, or even the more mystical Avicennians, deal with a given intellect and its soul, where on one level it is an actor, on another level it is a recipient. So he's dealing with this Ayan, like for example, here he says something to the effect of, in relation to the essence, the Ain al-Thabita, the immutable archetypal essence, is passive, but in relation to its subject, where it becomes its lord, the Rab, it is completely active. Mullah Sadra doesn't articulate things in that explicit a way, but Qaysari does. Yeah.
So that's one of the roles. That's one of the roles that he gives to the archetypes. But I was thinking that even in, and maybe this is what you meant by the intellect soul thing, that even in relation to the names, the archetypes have an active role, even though they're receptive. There's a kind of reciprocal action that the archetypes have on the names, so that they are the things that are giving the forms to the names as the names manifest externally.
Yes.
So like the shape of the world, to put it that way, the form or the shape of the world is being actively determined by the archetypes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that it's such a prominent role, it seems.
Yes, it is. I agree very much.
And so I was thinking a little bit more about how to understand that difference between the mahiyya and the wujud. Also in relation to just the motion of things, that it seems that here it's, if we want to like attribute, or like, well, Ibn Arabi does have the idea of the renewal of creation. That seems to be at the level of the wujud, whereas the impression I get about the archetypes is that they're stable. They're called thabita, right? There's a kind of relative stability to the structure of things,
Mhm.
even if the matter or the wujud is in motion.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
so
Yes and no, as with everything with Ibn Arabi. Um, let's put it this way. The ayana thabita can be taken in one sense as individuated containers of existence, or the modality of the universal existence. Okay? In themselves, right, from that higher vantage point, they have no existence because they are only from that level particular ideations of God. Okay? At that level. So they are completely Adam. But as we move down the scale of the self-disclosures, as these self-disclosures start to become active towards the generation of the world, they themselves, as these individuated containers of wujud, become active in relation to what is below them in the world, making them thus more real. You could, I think, this is something that, Ibn Arabi throws this right at the beginning of the first chapter of Fusus al-Hikam, but then doesn't really return to it that much later in the Fusus. I think the concept of mirror, in terms of understanding what these ayan are, is a much better symbol than anything else, whether container or whatever else. It's as if we're dealing with these cascading emanations that are simultaneously mirrors, being receptive to what is above them, right? In terms of the reflection thrown, cast into that plane of the mirror. But then in terms of what is below them, they're active in insofar as they're casting that reflection that has been cast into them below themselves, and so on and so forth. So we have this extremely holographic picture then of what these ayan are. And so once you look at it from that perspective, then the notion of a container of wujud starts to gain a little bit more intelligibility about what it is that we're talking about, if that makes any sense to you.
yeah, it does make sense, that image. But I think what you were saying at the very beginning was that, like in the last analysis, we have to think of even the quiddities as being secondary. And I guess this brings up the whole question also of the asalat al-wujud. I was trying to think about, why is it that we give primacy to either of these if in some sense they are actually acting on each other reciprocally.
Which is what precisely, it is exactly the point that Sheikh Ahmed al-Aswai makes in his Fawaid al-Hikmiyya, in his philosophical epitome. So yeah, these two, wujud and mahiyya, or wujud and ain, are both coextensive to each other according to him, and are acting upon each other, albeit that wujud, in terms of being that agent that looks upon its Lord, is primary, right? But God itself, or the essence itself, is outside of the scheme of either wujud or mahiyya. Another way to look at it is that the first intellect is both existence and quiddity simultaneously. And it's acting upon itself in such a way that then generates all these various worlds and hypostases below itself. But the one, the tohon of Plotinus, is not even usia, or even, you can't even call it hyper-usia, hyper being or hyper substance. It's beyond that. Even to call it transcendent, let alone immanent, is itself a misconception, which is same thing that Ibn Arabi says in so many words.
So is would we say that you just explained why it is that wujud is primary? It's because it looks upon its Lord. But is that the same as saying that it initiates, or that it's active first, or something like that? That
it's the first receptivity, right? The first intellect, because because it's looking at its Lord, that means that the reflection of its Lord is the first thing cast on it. But then he says that essence looks upon itself, rather, okay? And by looking at itself, it means that it's also looking upon existence, wujud. But wujud's primary function is to look upon the essence. That is the reflection cast upon the mirror. So if the first intellect is mirror, it is the soul, as it were, of that realm, right? It is that reflection of the essence is being cast into it, right? And that reflection then, in a sense, becomes coexistence on its simultaneous level to essence, who's then looking at itself as that reflection cast in the mirror.
I think this was where maybe Sadra's argument is still good, where he seems to say, because the quiddities also exist, and so we have to, when we talk about the existence of the ayn, then we're already presupposing wujud in even discussing that.
Yeah.
So,
and another thing, well, I mean, we also have to bear this in mind. This is something that Ibn Arabi emphasizes several times in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, that whether that the terms wujud and adam, or something being existent and non-existence, is always relative to the plane that it's being discussed. So that whereas at one plane we can talk about the adamiyah or madumiyah of something, the non-existence or annihilation of something, on another plane we can talk about its existence. Right? So there's no I mean, obviously, this whole Aristotelian, excluded middle perspective does not occur with Ibn Arabi. It's a standpoint epistemology. So something is real at the plane which is being perceived, at another plane that it's being perceived as unreal, and so on and so forth. And that's why, in my opinion, the mirror imagery works the best, because if we take the concreteness of the mirror, or the existence of the mirror, just kind of bracket that sort of on the side for a minute and just look at the mirror as is, say, then mirror has no existence without reflection, has no function, no existence at all. Its existence is by virtue of its reflection.
mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good image. I'll try to contemplate that image. I think that'll help. Okay, the other thing I just wanted to mention, this is related to the same thing, is I found it really helpful, this distinction that he makes between the forms of quiddities. This is on page 109. Third full paragraph, where he says, the forms of quiddities in our mind are shadows of the forms in divine knowledge. And this distinction it runs throughout the chapter. I've even heard it described as distinction between two kinds of wujud. There's wujud ilmi and wujud dhihni, which also is not, I don't find that in Mullah Sadra.
Yeah.
So I found that really fascinating because it seems to give a different understanding of what discursive knowledge is. That if quiddities in our minds are like, secondary intelligibles, as Sadra would call them, this kind of like validates our mental concepts at a really high level. It's not about distancing oneself from rationality, but it's almost like about intensifying it, because if you take the concepts high enough, you get to divine knowledge.
Yeah, exactly correct. This is 100% spot on. Yeah, that's exactly what it implicates. Definitely.
That's so fascinating. It's just a completely different way of thinking about rationality.
Yes.
It's like there's the dhawq, but this also has like its own integrity and its own validity. Like,
yeah, of course, which is what what the tradition has always held. I mean, it is only a particular tendency within Sufism that kind of poo-poos all formal learning. And you get this also in Rumi to some extent, and the more poetic tradition does this quite a fair bit. I read you that line yesterday from Masnavi about rationalism, but with Ibn Arabi, and let alone the school of the Ishraq, this has its place. It's like a stepping stone. Also, for example, in the story that we read yesterday, right? You can take the initial ABCs that are being written on the tablet for the child as the kind of the introductory rationalist steps to understanding the knowledge that he's then going to gain throughout the rest of the story, right? So you gotta these guys are all saying you start somewhere, and because you start somewhere, the contents of what you are learning, the ratiocinative concepts of the mind have a reality to them, albeit zihni or maghuli on a certain other level. But they do possess a reality, nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, from reading Sadra, I didn't get that sense. I got the sense that this is okay. But
in the Asfar, he does flesh this out a little bit more. It's not what we read in the Hikmet al-Arshi is not the final work. He does deal with this in a few places, not completely to my satisfaction, but he does address it. He doesn't leave it hanging.
Okay, that's good to know. Alrighty, well, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. How are you?
Alaikum salam.
Yeah, so to piggyback off of the train of thought that Hussein has brought us upon, what is the role of the active intellect in all of this? Because we've seen the active intellect portrayed so strongly within all of these aphorisms. So what's it doing here in terms of manifesting?
This is the school of Ibn Arabi. So they don't when they use that term, they're not using it as a reference to their own system. They're using it usually as a reference to either the Peripatetics or the Illuminationists. So the active intellect for the school of Ibn Arabi is basically the first intellect itself that then projects its actions, its af'al, in some of these other hypotheses, such as the universal soul and universal nature. Right? So the closest to the aql fa'al in the school of Ibn Arabi, if you want to like as a sublunary intelligence, would be the universal nature, which is the plane of the duality, where all of these dualities emerge.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Yep. Nate, did you want to say something? If you're there? There you are.
Hey, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Your mic is really low.
Oh, hold on one second.
That's
this better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. This was an interesting one too. Maybe going back to page 97, there was something that stuck with me. It's the sentence that begins, "The prophet mentioned these names by saying, by the names you have reserved in the knowledge of your unseen, since these names by their essences solicit the unseen. Fleeing the manifest, they have no external existence." It got me to thinking a lot about how Qaysari and others that we have read too, they talk about external existence. And I was wondering, maybe just a very basic assumption here, are they meaning external from the frame of reference of us as
Yes.
entities, or
Yes.
because it doesn't seem to be from the perspective of wujud, you can talk about an external.
No, that's it's a good thing you put your finger on that. Yes. It's from our perspective. Also remember in this chapter, he begins in the later paragraphs, he starts to distinguish the primary name agents. So he says the names, the first, awal and al-batin, are the kind of the primary names. And then the names al-akhar and al-zahir refer to, the efficient outcome, if you would, of that process.
Right.
It begins with the first and the hidden.
Right, that's right. And actually, in the same paragraph that we were looking at here on page 97, let's see, it says, so he goes on to say, so the forms of these names only have existence in knowledge and cannot be described as having actual existence. So what he's saying there is that within the scheme of wujud as a whole, we can speak of, well, sort of like with Suhrawardi, gradations of being. Some of the being is what, from our perspective, relationally might be a virtual
Yes.
reality.
Bam. Bam. Yes, that's exactly what it means. And this is one of the first points that Ibn Arabi himself highlights in the first chapter of the fusus. When we're talking about the names, we're not talking about these distinct mushakhasi or tashakhwasi realities. They're relations.
Right. And usually, as it's presented to me in various sources, you can understand all of the created cosmos as a dance of these names in relation to each other. Each entity is a configuration of names and the possibilities that come with those names at any given moment.
Yep. But ultimately, they're also, in a sense, these distinctions that are only apparent to us because we're in the kathra, in the multiplicity,
Right.
plane of multiplicity. And ultimately, these names themselves don't have a wujud ayniyah, an essential existence. They're just merely relations in relation to us.
Right. So when we're knowing something, when we're contemplating something in knowledge that does not have a quote unquote external or manifest reality, essentially what we're doing is we are in a certain sense a delimited or focused reflection of God's own conscious process. And we are directing God's own consciousness into knowledge, into a sort of a virtual layer of this wujudi landscape. And I would go so far as to say that in doing that, that's probably what's happening when we're being creative.
Yes.
When an engineer is designing something, when an artist is bringing something into the universe that didn't exist before, things like that.
Yeah. 100% correct. Yes. That's exactly what's happening. But it's the process, rather than being one way or the other,
Right.
is actually a circular one, right? So as the way that the school of Ibn Arabi puts it, these immutable archetypal, these infinite, without end, immutable archetypal essences are constantly demanding to be existentiated into essential existence.
Right.
And we, as the loci of bringing these things forth, then play our part in making this happen. Right? So in one sense, you can also then say that individuated immutable archetypal essences themselves become the agents of existentiating other ones into essential existence.
Right.
ad infinitum.
So in this whole drama of wujud, there are, of course, scales of existence, gradations of
Yes.
existence, and they're all going on simultaneously. There's not
Yes.
a one stops here and another begins there.
Yeah.
And then I think one final point, very small, but I just wanted to make sure that I am on the track with the terminology. So several times throughout the chapter, he mentions possible entities and impossible entities.
Mm.
Now, I think I understand what a possible entity is pretty intuitively, but an impossible entity is the word impossible or the translation into impossible. Does it have a technical meaning or is it just our colloquial sense of impossible?
No, mumtana. They use the philosophical term that the philosophers themselves use. So imtina
Okay.
and mumtana. So the three forms of existence, according to Al-Farabi and Avicenna, is wajib, mumkin, and mumtana. So necessary, possible, and impossible, right? Usually the examples that are given in a lot of these philosophical texts is an impossibility. They give it in a geometric example of a square circle, for example,
Right.
And similar. So these are the impossibilities.
Right. So we plug some concepts together, but we have no indication that those could ever be within the cosmos that we know. They exist conceptually, if anything.
Yeah. Which, according
Okay.
to many psychonauts, including myself, such impossibilities like square circles and similar are actually witnessed in that kind of, high psychoactive entheogenic state. So, which means that they have some form of conceptual existence, such that then this whole category of impossibility that the Peripatetic Aristotelians insist on as a categorical impossibility itself is quite fluid. I mean,
Right. And
go ahead. Yeah.
oh, it's just also interesting to me that our rationality tends to follow the contours of our sensory experience, such that, sometimes there are people who have synesthesia, their senses are crossed.
Yes.
So they might, see music and hear color.
Yeah.
So I would guess just from my own dabbling in the psychedelic universe too, it's like some things like that do happen, and then your rationality tries to analyze it conceptually because your
Mm.
rationality is still there,
Yeah.
but it would not make any sense within the frame of our normative day-to-day
Yes.
consciousness.
Which then goes back to what Ibn Arabi insists throughout his magnum opus, that these categories of non-existence and existence are always relative to the position of the perceiver. It's all standpoint.
Right.
Such that within wujud itself, everything is possible, should it so will.
Right. That's a very that's another, and I'll probably end on this note, but that's a very interesting thought too, because in some ways it's anticipating something that from the physical sciences standpoint, modernity has kind of caught up with. And, since Giordano Bruno decentralizing the earth and then decentralizing the sun, and now we live in this vast expanse, and where you are in any given coordinate of space and time, everything is relative to that.
Yeah.
And it's equally true of every being in any coordinate on that plane.
Yes.
But without saying that he's talking specifically about the physical here in the way the scientists do today, this is a framework that encompasses that and anticipates it.
Yes, it does. 100% it does. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's all for right now, but this is awesome.
Yeah, it is. You're welcome. Assad, there you are.
Okay, so just let me try to find the English. Um, the first one should be somewhere in page 79.
17.
97, excuse me,
The
97.
one that Nate just
Uh,
read. That same page. Yep.
So it's somewhere in the middle when he is commenting about possible existence, about mumkinat. None of them remain in the divine knowledge without coming into being. This is because all of them seek actual existence by the tongue of their existential dispositions. Had the bestower, the magnanimous, not endowed them with existence, he would cease to be magnanimous. And if he engendered some and not others, despite each seeking existence, it would result in the exercise of an arbitrary preference. So this passage for me is very interesting because basically it is said everything which by itself is wujud mumkin, sooner or later it should be appear in the realm of external existence, which answers many philosophical questions. For example, does parallel universes exist, and so on and so forth, different worlds? Because the answer is if it is real, if it is really possible by itself, then sooner or later it should receive its existence from Allah Ta'ala. Otherwise, if it not receive its existence in one way or other, then it will contradict with the name of Allah Ta'ala, for example, Al-Wahhab or Jawad or so on.
God, there's so much that can be said about that, what you just said. But let me give you a practical example. I have tried this with myself as experiments at various different points. Okay? First of all, I wanted to understand my own psychology of longing for something and how it manifests or doesn't manifest, right? Now, you find a lot of discussion of this with a lot of New Age people and the whole, you know, what a lot of the New Agers talk about manifesting things, right? I wanted to understand the mechanics of this and from a theurgic point of view, how it actually works. And reading this stuff, and especially Ibn Arabi, the mechanics of this is quite complex, but it's extremely interesting. And it also highlights so much, and it teaches you so much about understanding your own mental and you know, spiritual function around things that you crave and want. Okay, it basically breaks down into a very simple form, and this is for myself. This is how I broke it down. Whatever the mind conceives and whatever the mind longs, on one level, this is the immutable archetypal essences themselves longing to come into existentiation, such that your desire for anything, whatever it could be, even it could be, you know, mundane things that people crave all the time, new girlfriend, car, whatever, you know, lifestyle, all of these on one particular level that is relevant to you are those ayana thabita desiring to come into essential existence. So then the question is, how is this affected? Because we know from personal experience that there are things that we want that never come into manifestation, even though we can think them. Now, one level in a suluk tells you that you need to let go of everything, right? Think of nothing, let go. You know, this is your nafs that is longing for this sort of thing. But this doesn't, while true, it is true that is the case, but it still doesn't answer the question of why that longing even exists. You know, what is this existential situation? And so once you interrogate that, you recognize that even the existential situation of a particular object of longing attached to your nafs itself is a divine longing to come into existence. Then this really then empowers even understanding what the nafs al-amara even is, okay? And takes it out of that duality and puts it into a plane of extreme complexity. So one thing that they're right about is that the minute that you recognize this and detach the emotion from it, your own personal emotion from that thing, by and large, more often than not, whatever it is, in some fashion, then existentiates. And this is the magical formula. This is the key to everything, right? You long for something long, long, long. God, God, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. Pray a million times, do 10,000 zikrs of this, 20,000 orad of that, and doesn't come. And then at some point you are frustrated and you let go, and 2 seconds later there is right in front of you. Okay? I have experienced this in so many different contexts again and again and again, right? That I have figured out that there is a metaphysics, there is an existential metaphysics to even longing on the most base levels of things, right? Why? Because as we said, the phase al-Aqdas, the most holy effusion, right, produces the contents of absolutely every conceivable thing that exists, and that includes the contents of longing, even though these contents may be the most contradictory, bizarre, weird things. Nevertheless, by the mere fact that they have been thought and emoted by you means that they have some form of existence, even an intelligible or madumia one. So then our task, in a sense, becomes to midwife these realities that we are longing for to existentiate into the world. We become the midwives, birthing the children of our mind. What does Surah Huwaidi say about the perfect nature? It is both the father and the spiritual child of his mind. Okay? So if you take these sorts of things, right, then that is how you bring it into existence. And so this is, in a sense, what the key to theurgy itself actually is. And so to be then a theurgist, you have to then train your mind very deliberately over a period of time to understand this dynamic and to detach your longing, your emotional longing from these things, in order to then allow them to come into being. And it's very much like a birthing process. Like when a woman is pushing a baby out of her, she's first squeezing, 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 and the baby gets stuck. The minute the midwife tells her to relax as the baby's head is starting to come out of her, right? That is when the baby literally comes out of her belly, right? So I've looked at all of these various, biological, things, and then kind of read that back into this sort of process. And invariably, I have found that whatever I have wanted so bad, at some point, maybe not even in the form that I even anticipated, it comes into existence. Because it is one of the ayana thabita demanding to come into existence. So take it from that point of view.
So this midwifery about which you are talking in a personal level,
Yeah.
if we extend it to the levels of a society, I think would be what you would call a theophanocracy.
Yes. Yes. Precisely. But it had, on theophanocracy, but requires actors who are conscious and knowledgeable about these processes. And so in essence, they themselves become the midwives of God. Right? So we have, rather than having one prophet for the age, we have a collective of them who are, just like Nate said yesterday, everybody is, basically producing their own Quran of their being, their own recitation of their being. But then this has implications for the wider society. So yeah, you could look at it from that angle as well, definitely.
Okay. And again, here we see how metaphysics takes completely practical
Yes,
dimensions in our life. The
yes,
next one, it is just below it, the same place, the next. Each individuals dependent on the time and occurrence of which God knows appear from the unseen to the visible without interruption until the cessation of the worldly plane. Uh, Here, the question
Keep
was
reading because here, because it really, because he says, likewise, they appear in the hereafter in the akhirah, as mentioned in the Son Hadith. If the believer wishes for a son in paradise, his gestation, birth, and teething occur the moment he wishes for it. God says you will receive in whatever your souls desire, whatever you ask for, a gift from the forgiving and merciful. Right? So even this kind of augments the point I just made. So even if there is not a physical manifestation of a given thing in this plane, what this is telling us is that whatever you're longing, whatever you wish for, you're already producing it in the other side for yourself. So a childless man, who wishes and pines for a son, is already creating that on the other side.
which again shows that we should be very careful about the contents of our mind.
Boom. Yes.
Even if it does not manifest in external
Yes.
reality, it has its impacts
Yes.
always.
Yes. Yes. So why in any genuine spiritual path, they get you to train your mind to control your mind first, because we are extremely powerful beings. And when we have not harnessed this power of ourselves, then it is a like a talisman that is out of control. And so this is what you produce in the world, this disequilibrium that we're witnessing right now, where we're destroying each other and destroying our environment and everything else around us. This has a metaphysical dimension, absolutely. And that is why it is important for every human being, and especially those who are in a path such as this, to get a control of their mind, watch their thoughts, harness the thoughts, because your responsibility is not only to yourself, your responsibility is also outside of yourself. So when you have a mass of irresponsible humans out there that are literally producing hell through their mind in the world, right? It also then necessitates its counterexample of those of us who become basically those who push back against the egregore that the collective human mind has created to stop this, gravy train.
The next one, so it is page 99. I'll read the passage and then formulate my question. So, okay, I think it is the second paragraph. Thus, the world of archetypes is the manifestation of the names the first and the absolute hidden. Whereas the world of spirits is the manifestation of the names the relative hidden and the relative manifest. The world of the visible is the manifestation of the absolute manifest and the last from one perspective, and the hereafter is the manifestation of the absolute last. So, I want to use this passage to ask the question, is which Nate start that the impossible things, there are two types. ممتنعات. The first type, which you already discussed, they are just توهمات, delusions which do not have some strong reality besides that they appear in our mind. But the second type of the impossible things, they are divine names. But such type of the divine names which do not manifest. And my question was that these names which do not manifest, also as Nate said, or the names which as مستأثر في علم الله, And does it mean that they do not have any manifestation at all in any level of existence, or again it is relational? As,
It's
for
really, it has
example,
to be it has to be relational if they even exist, and even if we have exceeded that they exist at some level that we may not have access to, then they do have existed on some other level, right? So the statement that Qaysari is making is not an absolute statement. It's relative to us, right? But that it is known that there are infinite other names, right? Means that they do have effect on some other level of existence, even if we don't perceive it. Otherwise, why even bring it up?
okay, so as he said somewhere further that we do not have access to them from the rational point of view, but let's say from the perspective of wahi and ilham, inspiration, some of the urafa get access to some of these names.
Yes.
Okay, okay, and the last one, just to find, it is page 105. So here is explain what is al-Fayz al-Aqdas and al-Fayz al-Muqaddas. In the beginning of the page, uh, through the holiest emanation, which is the theophany of the essence with respect to its initial and hidden aspect, the emanation always reaches the permanent archetypes from the essence. Then through the holy emanation, which is the theophany of the essence with respect to its last and manifest aspect, and according to the receptivity and capacity of the permanent archetypes, the emanation reaches the external entities from the divine presence. No, here I get the idea that even these two terms, Faith Akdes and Faith Muqaddas, are somehow not so strongly fixed in their meaning. That because the first time earlier in the book, we read something to the extent that by the Faith Akdas, the holiest emanations, the divine names get let's say their existence, and by the Faith Muqaddas, the Aryan Thabite, they get their existence in the contents of the knowledge of God. But here, Faith.
Hold on. Let backtrack here. I know what you're saying. Okay, this is the reason why I use the imami categories of the seven attributive imprints, right? Because of this very reason. So let's look at this again. Through the holiest emanation, or the most holy emanation, the Fayz al-Aqdas, which is the theophany of the essence with respect to its initial and hidden aspect, the emanation phase always reaches the permanent archetypes from the essence. What does that mean? That means it is the divine will. It is the Mashiach. This is the kun, right? Then, through the holy emanation, or the holy effusion, as I call it, Fayz al-Muqaddas, which is the theophany of the essence with respect to its last and manifest aspect, which means its tashahhus, its specification, and according to the receptivity and capacity of the permanent archetypes, the emanation reaches the external entities from the divine presence. And this is the fayakun. Does that make any sense now?
Yes, yes. The only thing which
But
Here.
then he explains it in the next paragraph. Every archetype is like a genus to that which is below it. Okay? In a sense, an intermediary for the divine emanation, reaching what is below until it reaches individuals, which is what I just said. So if the genus occurs at the level of the divine will, then its species occurs at the level of the divine volition. So the genius initiates at the level of the kun, B, and its species then initiates at the level of the fayakun.
And just from one more perspective, in the Hadith Qudsi, كنت كنزا مخفيا فأحببت أن أعرف. So the first part, I love to be known, the level of faith أقدس. فخلقت الخلق لكي أعرف, and I created the beings to be known, the level of faith مقدس.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the
Thank you very much.
kuntu I am or I was is the level of the essence itself. Okay, kuntu. That at that level we're dealing with the dhat al-ahadiyah. Kanzan makhfiyan, you can say it is the stirrings of the ahadiyah towards its wahidiyah, towards its inclusive unity. Right? Fa'ahbabtu an uraf, and I love to be known is the level of these determinations coming into being on the level of their genera, on their genus. فَخَلَقْتُ لِأُرَبْ. And so I create the world in order to be known. And that is the level of the Faiz al-Muqaddas and the Fayakun. And it is.
Okay. Thank you very much,
Sure.
Saidi.
Okay, that brings us back again to, I actually hate to bring this up again, but
Sure.
Wahid, if you could look at the middle paragraph of page 101,
Sure.
just have a look at that and you'll see what I'm saying. You see what I'm talking
The
about.
immaterial intellects and souls, given that they know their origin and what they emanate, they are the manifestations of divine knowledge and divine books. Okay? Or the throne al-Arsh is the manifestation of the merciful or compassionate al-Rahman, and its setting place or Mocha, or which my term is epiphanic setting place. The pedestal is the manifestation of the compassionate, or actually the merciful al-Rahim, and the seventh sphere is the manifestation of the provider al-Razaq, the sixth of the omniscient al-Alim, the fifth of the compeller al-Qahar, the fourth of the light al-Nur, and life giver al-Muhyi, the third of the fashioner al-Musawwir, the second of the engender al-Bari, and the first of the creator al-Khaliq. Now, the way that Qaysari has laid this out is actually contradicting a very key chapter of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, where Ibn Arabi talks about the lunar mansions and the astrological correspondence with the names. Ibn Arabi actually begins with the name the engenderer or the originator, al-Bari, not al-Khaliq.
Okay.
So
Really?
this
Okay.
is also, in a sense, kind of a peculiar determination by Qaysari itself, because Ibn Arabi says something completely different in the Futuhat.
Well, there you go. So that's my whole point is that I was pretty sure last week that he did this, Qaysari, and I'm not trying to criticize him here, but he kind of gets a few things inverted, including,
Yes.
and this is what I hate to bring up again, is he's calling, and I hate to beat a dead horse here, but just to point it out what I was talking about, he's actually calling, for God's sakes, where is it there? The Rahman, he's calling merciful, and Rahim, he's calling compassionate, which is the inversion I had brought up earlier. So, and I'm glad that you said that. So this whole paragraph is kind of messed up. I mean, not that it's incorrect technically. It's just,
let's get away from messed up. Okay, let's just say that from author to author to author, even within the same general school of the Akbarians, right? There are different perspectives about these, right?
Yeah.
So instead of all of them like replicating or parroting Ibn Arabi and what Ibn Arabi says, they have their own ideas about what some of this stuff means, while following his general ontological framework in the context of the commentary on his fusus al-hikam.
Right. Right. Yeah. You're not exactly messed
Yeah.
up. No, just
Yeah.
just different.
Yeah, just different.
Like if we're trying to like have a model that we can all kind of, use simultaneously, that's kind of an alteration or an inversion of the model that we're all kind of looking at
In a
together.
sense, it is. But just anybody who's read Ibn Arabi on the level of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah from knows that even with Ibn Arabi, there are just like, to a rationalist mind, some gaping contradictions in every formula that he introduces. And that is why, rather than take it as a contradiction, the safer way to contextualize this is from the point of view of a standpoint epistemology. That every statement that is being made by these various authors that seemingly contradicts some other statements elsewhere, whether by themselves or others, is just a standpoint, a momentary standpoint of analysis.
Right. Okay. All right.
Otherwise, and which is basically what these guys themselves were doing. What the risk is that you start to formalize these ideas.
Right. Yeah,
the problem.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm not attempting to try, in case you think by now that I'm trying to
No, I'm not
put
saying
in concrete.
The process, which is one of the criticisms that actually, some modern commentators of Ibn Arabi have leveled at his son-in-law and successor, Sadruddin Qanawi, that he began this whole, train of thought of trying to systematize and formalize Ibn Arabi.
Right.
So.
No, I agree completely. Yeah, I'm not for formal systems as a be all and end all kind of thing, for sure. And
That's
in fact,
one thing that musicians understand better than anybody, I think.
right. And that actually, I love how this closing. I wanted to bring up also the closing on page 111, which is the last page, I believe. Basically how it ends up saying the effacement. Similarly, Amir al-Mu'minin,
Yep.
peace be upon him, in the Hadith of Kumail,
Yep.
states that the secret of the prophets and messengers, peace be upon them all, is the effacement of speculation when the known becomes evident.
Which is,
and then it goes on.
One of my proof texts. This is the Hadith Kumail. I even have a Persian commentary I composed in 2023, published. He closes with the Hadith Kumail of Ali.
Okay.
Which I think is probably the one of the ultimate, esoteric proof texts of Islam. So then now he tells us to contextualize everything that he's just said about these immutable archetypal essences, the Ayana Thabita, in light of the conversation between Kumail and Ali.
Right. Awesome. Okay. All right. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. That's great.
No worries.
Just to add, what would be your old translation of the Arabic الحقيقة صحو المعلوم مع محو الموهوم?
The effacement of speculation. I have different ways of translating it. He's actually got this backwards. Mahw al-ma'hum is the erasure of conjecture, was sahf al-ma'lum in the realization of the known, is how I've translated. One of the ways I've translated it.
Okay, thank you, CD.
No problem. Anybody else want to make a quick comment before we close the session? No? Okay. So next week, for this particular class, we're talking about substance and accident according to the Akbarians and according to Qaysari specifically, which itself is quite an important discussion. We'll start to kind of make a lot of the preceding discussion about the names and the Ayana Thabita a little less opaque. It is a little bit dense in certain places, but it's not that bad. But it actually allows us to see how the Akbarians look at this concept and how the Peripatetics and the philosophers and even the Illuminationists discuss this concept. And then Next Saturday, we will come back for our Suhoordi course. So until next weekend, everybody have a good week. And Ya Haq.